year was 1972, and the quiet, unassuming town of Gloucester, England, harbored a secret so grotesque it would stain its cobblestone streets forever. On the surface, 25 Cromwell Street was just another house in a row of Victorian terraces, but behind its pale facade lurked horrors that would shock even the most hardened investigators. It was here that Fred and Rose West, a seemingly ordinary couple, wove a tapestry of terror so dark it defied comprehension. Fred West was, at first glance, an unremarkable man, stocky with a ruddy complexion and a disarming smile. He could blend into any crowd, the kind of face you'd forget as soon as you saw it. But beneath the surface of his seemingly ordinary demeanor lay a man shaped by a deeply troubled past. His childhood was marred by alleged abuse and neglect, a toxic environment that seemed to nurture his obsession with control and his simmering propensity for violence. Fred learned early on how to manipulate those around him, masking his darkness with charm when it suited him. His early life was a patchwork of petty crimes, failed relationships, and disturbing behavior, all of which hinted at the monster he would become. In 1969, Fred's path crossed with Rosemary Letts, a teenager whose outward innocence belied the cruelty that was beginning to take root within her. Rose, as she was known, was no stranger to hardship, growing up in a household rife with dysfunction and abuse. Fred, nearly a decade older, quickly became a dominant force in her life, recognizing in her a kindred spirit, a partner who could not only tolerate his depravity but match it and perhaps even surpass it. Theirs was a relationship forged in darkness, a perfect storm of sadism and manipulation that would ultimately leave a trail of victims in their wake. Together, they were unstoppable, their shared hunger for power and cruelty feeding off one another as they embarked on a reign of terror that would shock the world. Their reign of terror began with an unholy alliance, a shared hunger for domination and pain that bound them together in a twisted partnership. Fred, a man with a sinister knack for manipulation, recognized in Rose not just a partner, but a mirror to his own depravity. She wasn't merely complicit, she was an active participant, her sadistic tendencies amplifying his darkness in ways even he couldn't have imagined. By the early 1970s, the couple had settled into 25 Cromwell Street, an unassuming house in Gloucester that would later be forever etched in infamy as the House of Horrors. It was behind those walls that their grim enterprise began to take shape. The Wests, with their disarming charm and feigned kindness, became predators in plain sight. Vulnerable young women, many of them runaways or estranged from their families, were lured into their clutches with promises of work, a place to stay, or simply the warmth of a friendly face. Rose, with her maternal demeanor, was often the bait, her outward charm masking the sadistic cruelty that lay beneath. Once inside the house, these women were trapped in a nightmare, subjected to unspeakable torment that would seal their fate. For Fred and Rose, the walls of Cromwell Street became a fortress of evil, a place where their darkest impulses could run unchecked. The first to disappear was 19-year-old Linda Goof in April 1973. She was a bright, vivacious woman, full of life and eager to carve out her independence. Recently moved out of her family home, she was seeking her own path, unburdened by the constraints of her small-town upbringing. She told her family she had found a place to stay with a nice couple who seemed warm, welcoming, and trustworthy. They were reassured by her optimism, never suspecting that this would be the last time they would see her alive. Linda's fate was sealed the moment she stepped through the door of 25 Cromwell Street. Fred and Rose wasted no time in turning their facade of kindness into a nightmare. Linda was bound and subjected to unimaginable torment, her cries for help swallowed by the thick walls of the house. The couple's sadistic tendencies knew no bounds as they inflicted horrific acts of violence upon her, feeding off each other's cruelty. When her life was finally extinguished, Fred, ever the pragmatist in their grim operation, dismembered her body with chilling efficiency. Her remains were buried in the cellar, a place that would soon become a graveyard for many more victims. For Fred and Rose, Linda was just the beginning, a dark initiation into the horrors that would follow. The cellar became their killing ground, a dark and claustrophobic space where screams were swallowed by thick walls, their echoes never escaping into the outside world. Above, the sounds of children laughing and playing created a chilling juxtaposition, a cruel irony that underscored the depth of Fred and Rose's depravity. Their growing brood of children, innocent in appearance, were unwilling pawns in their parents' twisted game. They lived in a house steeped in horror, their childhoods marred by trauma and fear. Some witnessed the unthinkable while others endured abuse themselves, their cries for help silenced by the oppressive control Fred and Rose wielded over every aspect of their lives. Rose had by now fully embraced her role as both predator and accomplice, her sadistic tendencies flourishing in the toxic environment they had created. She didn't just participate in the horrors, she thrived in them, often taking the lead in tormenting their victims. Her cruelty extended beyond the cellar. Rose turned prostitution into another facet of their depravity, bringing clients into the home and exposing her children to the darkest corners of her life. The house, once an ordinary family home, had become a fortress of evil, its walls absorbing the unspeakable acts that unfolded within. The cellar, a place of unimaginable suffering, was only one layer of the nightmare that was life inside 25 Cromwell Street. The Wests were careful, or so they thought. They preyed on society's most vulnerable, women who wouldn't be missed, those living on the fringes of society. Runaways, hitchhikers, or women estranged from their families became their primary targets, individuals whose disappearances would rarely raise alarm. Their modus operandi was chillingly efficient, a well-rehearsed routine perfected through years of practice. Rose, with her matronly demeanor and warm, disarming smile, was the perfect bait. She exuded a false sense of security, luring victims into the house under the guise of offering work, a place to stay, or simply a kind gesture. Few suspected the horrors that awaited them behind the doors of 25 Cromwell Street. Once inside, the women were trapped, their fates sealed. The Wests wasted no time in revealing their true nature. The victims were subjected to unimaginable torment, enduring hours or even days of sadistic abuse. Fred and Rose fed off each other's depravity, their shared hunger for domination driving them to inflict ever greater pain. Death, when it finally came, was a grim mercy. Fred, ever the handyman, approached the aftermath with chilling practicality. He dismembered the bodies with clinical precision, treating the remains as though they were mere objects to be disposed of. The cellar and garden became their burial grounds, each grave a silent testament to their unthinkable cruelty. Over time, the house itself seemed to absorb the darkness, its walls bearing witness to the suffering of the innocent. What appeared to be an ordinary home became a graveyard, a monument to the West's reign of terror and the countless lives they so callously destroyed. But their reign wasn't without its cracks. In 1971, Fred's stepdaughter Charmaine, just 8 years old, vanished without explanation. Charmaine was a spirited child, defiant and unwilling to succumb to Rose's sadistic whims. Her resilience made her a target of Rose's growing cruelty, and the tension between them was palpable. Charmaine's refusal to cower under Rose's authority enraged her, and one day, the little girl simply disappeared. Fred, ever the manipulator, concocted a story to explain her absence, claiming that her biological mother, Rena, had come to take her away. It was a convenient lie, one that silenced any immediate questions and allowed the Wests to maintain their facade. The truth, however, was far darker. Charmaine had not been taken away. She had been murdered. Her tiny body was buried beneath their former home, the marks on her bones a silent testament to the brutality she endured. Investigators later uncovered evidence pointing directly to Rose as the perpetrator of this horrific act. Charmaine's death was not only a chilling reminder of the West's capacity for violence, but also a tragic prelude to the horrors that would unfold in the years to come. Her disappearance marked an early crack in their carefully constructed facade, a crack that would widen as their crimes escalated. By the mid-1970s, whispers began to circulate about the Wests, though few dared to voice their suspicions aloud. Neighbors couldn't help but notice the steady stream of young women entering 25 Cromwell Street, many of whom seemed vulnerable or transient. They came with suitcases and hopeful expressions, but they were never seen leaving. The sight became unsettlingly routine, the kind of oddity that people noticed but dismissed, unwilling to believe that something truly sinister could be happening in their quiet neighborhood. Fred's behavior only added to the unease. His penchant for crude jokes, often laced with inappropriate sexual innuendos, raised eyebrows. He had a way of making people uncomfortable, his comments teetering on the edge of something darker, though no one could have imagined the true horrors hidden behind those walls. The West's children also began to show signs that all was not as it seemed. Their haunted eyes, withdrawn demeanors, and uncharacteristic silence betrayed the nightmare they lived daily. Teachers noticed bruises and odd behavior, but Fred and Rose always had excuses at the ready, stories that painted their children as clumsy or difficult. Behind closed doors, the children were pawns in their parents' twisted games, enduring abuse that left invisible scars. To outsiders, the Wests were a strange but functional family. To those inside 25 Cromwell Street, it was a house of unspeakable terror. The whispers grew louder, but no one could have guessed the true scale of the nightmare unfolding in their midst. It wasn't until 1992 that the carefully constructed facade of normalcy began to crumble. Heather West, Fred and Rose's eldest daughter, had vanished in 1987, and Fred had been quick to offer an explanation. He claimed Heather had run away, spinning a story that painted her as a rebellious teenager who had chosen to leave the family behind. But her siblings knew better. Heather had long been the target of relentless abuse, her defiant nature and refusal to submit making her a constant focus of Fred and Rose's ire. The torment she endured was well known within the household, and her sudden disappearance was met with a chilling silence. The other children, terrified of suffering the same fate, were warned to keep quiet. Fred's threats were as casual as they were horrifying. He would tell them, with a macabre smirk, that if they misbehaved, they'd end up under the patio like Heather. This sinister remark, intended to instill fear and compliance, would eventually prove fatal to their charade. The children carried the weight of this secret for years, their silence a testament to the terror they lived under. But as the cracks in the West's story began to widen, Heather's disappearance would become the key to exposing the horrors hidden at 25 Cromwell Street. In 1994, police finally acted on growing suspicions of child abuse within the West household, suspicions that had lingered for years, but had never been fully investigated. What began as a seemingly routine inquiry quickly spiraled into something far more sinister when officers discovered human remains buried in the garden of 25 Cromwell Street. The body was soon identified as Heather West, Fred and Rose's eldest daughter, and her grisly fate marked the beginning of the end for the West's reign of terror. Heather's remains were only the first chilling discovery, the first domino to fall in what would become one of the most horrifying cases in British criminal history. As investigators expanded their search, the true scale of the West's crimes began to emerge. The excavation of the property revealed a nightmare beyond comprehension. Bones, body parts, and the remnants of lives cruelly cut short were unearthed, each discovery peeling back another layer of the couple's depravity. The cellar, damp and confining, became a focal point of the investigation, yielding evidence of unimaginable horrors. Even the walls of the house seemed to hold secrets, absorbing the echoes of the suffering inflicted within. With each new body uncovered, the West's carefully constructed facade crumbled further, exposing the full extent of their unspeakable crimes. Fred was arrested, his jovial facade finally crumbling under the crushing weight of the evidence against him. The man who had spent decades hiding his darkness behind a disarming smile and crude humor was now exposed for what he truly was, a ruthless predator. Rose, ever the manipulator, tried to distance herself from the horrors, feigning innocence and painting herself as a victim of Fred's coercion. She played the role of the abused wife with practiced conviction, attempting to shift all blame onto her husband. But the truth, as the investigation unfolded, was undeniable and far more damning than her performance suggested. Witnesses began to come forward recounting chilling tales of Rose's violent temper and her active, even enthusiastic participation in the abuse and murders. Her cruelty was not passive. She had been a driving force behind much of the horror. The couple's children, now old enough to speak out, shattered any remaining illusions. Their testimonies painted a harrowing picture of a household steeped in terror, where violence and fear ruled every corner. They described the physical and emotional abuse they endured, the screams they heard, and the sinister threats that kept them silent. Rose's mask of innocence slipped further with each revelation, exposing her as an equal partner in their reign of terror. Fred, perhaps sensing the inevitability of his fate, took his own life in January 1995 while awaiting trial. Alone in his prison cell, he fashioned a makeshift noose and ended his life, robbing his victims' families of the chance to see him face justice. He left behind a chilling note, a final act of defiance that offered no remorse for his actions. In it, there were no apologies, no acknowledgement of the pain and suffering he had caused, only a twisted sense of self-pity and an eerie silence about his crimes. His death marked the end of his involvement in one of the most horrifying cases in British history, but it did little to bring closure to those left behind. Rose, however, was left to face the full weight of justice, her crimes laid bare for the world to see. In November 1995, following a harrowing and highly publicized trial, the full extent of her depravity came to light. Witness after witness testified, recounting the horrors that unfolded at 25 Cromwell Street. The evidence against her was overwhelming, a damning collection of testimonies, forensic findings, and chilling accounts from her own children. They described in vivid detail her role as a willing and active participant in the abuse and murders, painting a picture of a woman who not only condoned the atrocities but often instigated them. Her calculated cruelty and unrelenting sadism shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The court sentenced her to life in prison, declaring that she would never be eligible for parole. Rose remains incarcerated to this day, her life confined to the walls of a prison cell. Her incarceration is a grim reminder of the evil she and Fred unleashed, a legacy of suffering that can never be erased. For the families of her victims, her imprisonment offers some measure of justice, ensuring that she will never again have the freedom to harm another soul. The legacy of Fred and Rose West is one of horror and heartbreak. Their crimes shattered countless lives, leaving scars that will never fully heal. 25. Cromwell Street was demolished in 1996, the ground paved over in an attempt to erase the physical reminder of their atrocities. But the memories linger, a dark chapter in the annals of true crime that serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity. Even now, decades later, the story of Fred and Rose West sends shivers down the spine. Their ability to mask their monstrous nature, to blend into society while committing such heinous acts, is a testament to the duality of evil. They were not the monsters under the bed. They were the monsters next door, hiding in plain sight, their smiles concealing the darkness within.